And I want to recognize the absence of John, who I really appreciate John. I think John, every time I've come to a meeting, John does a professional job. John is a fine fella. Consider him a friend. We did some communicating when I was working at a distance. I've worked on several assignments. Nevada is just one of them. I worked out there twice. But I've worked for Delta Airlines. I've worked for Allegiant Airlines. I've worked for U.S. Air Force projects over here at Boeing. And I worked in the weapons division over there with the aircraft that were integrated for weapons. And I'm going to actually open up to you about some things I've never said before. Publicly, I'm not going to put myself on the spot, but I'm going to give you some good information. It's real information. It's first-hand stuff. It's really not talking about any ET hardware, but I'll share a little of what I can. I actually never touched any what I would call extraterrestrial ET hardware while I was in Nevada. I was in the areas where it supposedly is. I never set my eyes on it, never got the opportunity to set my eyes on it, and I've been very close to where it's supposed to be. So, things are controlled pretty tight, and anything that goes on with the government, anybody that's ex-military knows about that. Knows you do what you're supposed to do, you be where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be, and you speak when you're supposed to speak. But in civilian life, we reach a certain age, and there comes a time in our life when we have to say, well, you know what? There's some things we need to share. So tonight, what I intend to do is get into a topic in an area of things that I feel would be very important to me and are important to me, and therefore I believe are important to many of you. I would also, in opening, like to honor and say a few words of appreciation for Walt. Walt Andrus. I mean, we couldn't say enough about this man. He was key and instrumental, of course, in forming the Mutual UFO Network. The Mutual UFO Network, in my opinion, is the highest respected group that is involved in genuine investigations of the subject. I respect the efforts of the investigators and those who are trained with MUFON to do their jobs. We're all specialists in life. Out here where you make your living, you're a specialist. MUFON is a specialist organization in investigating the phenomenon of things that otherwise would go unexplained. The way MUFON goes about investigating is respectful, honorable, and it has a high degree of integrity. And for that reason, and of course I'm speaking loud for the camera, I want you to very seriously consider upholding the things that MUFON stands for, the integrity of MUFON. And saying that now, as I get started, I want to make my disclaimer statement. Any opinions that I state that are opinions of mine, in no way is MUFON responsible for tonight. I'm a guest speaker. I stand accountable to myself in these areas. I do not hold MUFON accountable for any of my opinions. Some of the facts that I'll share with you are firsthand. I make up nothing. I do not believe in exaggeration. If it was 1, it was 1. If it was 10, it was 10. If it was 100, it was 100. I don't make 10 100 or 100 1,000. And I believe that's one of the things MUFON stands for. Accuracy to detail, accurate reporting, regardless of where it leads. We don't make something out to be what it's not. And getting started.
Thank you, Alan.
You're welcome, Walt. Thank you. In fact, that's for you, Walt. Okay, what I'm going to talk about is something I have dealt with ever since I was 5 years old. Stigma. A lot of us don't know a lot about the word stigma. Neither did I. But since I'm talking about it, I figured I should look some things up and use what I think is appropriate. So, stigma, first off, is a Greek word. Where the word stigma came from was in the old times, slave days and all of the ancient Greek world. They would tattoo or mark their slaves. And that became a stigma. Wherever they were at, that marked them as a slave. It associated them. The Romans did some of the same thing. But what happens to folks that they don't really connect with at first? A lot of people who are actual abductee, we'll call it victims, because you didn't have a choice in that. It's not like you went up and signed up and said, I want to become an abductee. Anyone who's ever experienced abduction, on whatever level, some are conscious and actually have conscious, real memories. A few do. Some are coming from the subconscious and recalled later in life at times in different forms. And there are folks who know how and are in expertise trained to help people recall, to help them go back and kind of re-experience under controlled conditions to help bring their memories into a little bit better definition. I think it's very important that we understand not only how to help ourselves, but how to be a help to others that need our friendship, a sympathetic ear, non-judgmentally. Trust me, someone who is a part of abduction, the first thing they deal with is stigma, a label. And I've got some notes, but if you won't mind, I'll just kind of take it, put it in my own words here. The very first thing that happens after, now obviously, everyone in this room, let me say this, is interested in the so-called UFO phenomenon. Now, I'm sure you've heard it explained many times. Of course, UFO just stands for any unidentified flying object. And everyone in this room already knows that we talk about a lot of things other than just unidentified flying things floating around out there in the air. But everyone in the media and in the public knows the kind of experiences that we talk about, the events that we talk about. It's not always a personal experience. A sighting is an event that you just happen to witness. That's a little bit different than intrusion into your personal and private life. You can see and witness an event that has an effect. It changes your awareness. But it may not impact you the way a personal event in your life of intrusion would impact you. So it's important for all of us to know that within the ranks of MUFON, and I did a little study about this organization, it doesn't focus so much on the particulars like with abduction experience or whatever, but it's part of it. It's part of the reporting of the event. Whether it be a sighting or whether it be some other interaction, it all goes into the reporting process. Therefore, indirectly, MUFON organization in itself has a lot of folks connected with it, as we are, in one way or another, that have abduction experience. I want to explain a little bit without getting too personal here. And then we'll come back, and in our discussion we will get personal. At the end of my little short talk, I want us to be very interactive. We're going to maybe ask some questions. Some of us are going to give maybe a little short account of an experience that you don't mind sharing publicly. And as a group, we're going to all become involved in the discussion. Let's keep it brief. Let's bring it to the point without any real long stories so that we can cover some things here. Stigma. Okay. When I first experienced the negatives, I had no idea what was happening with me. My mother and dad were country folk with basic education, lived in the East Texas woods area, upper East Texas, and I happened to be out in a prime location for hunters to find a child to play with from up there. And I had these, what they call nightmares. In later years, my mother would always say, boy, Alan, that's what they called me. I had siblings, and they didn't have this go on with them. I thank God for that. But they would say, Alan had the most horrible nightmares when he was a kid. That's how the family addressed it. That was their solution to the problem. I sleepwalked. They'd find me outside in my underwear with nothing on, walking barefoot in the woods. My dad would have to come out and hunt me at night. Now, did I sleepwalk? Maybe. Did my imagination just get wild and carried away and I don't remember it? Maybe. But that doesn't account for what was when I was awake in my clear mind and could identify and examine in detail even as a 5-year-old child. Therefore today I can say unequivocally without hesitation, at risk of even losing my professional license, at that risk, that I was a real abduction victim. Now everybody will stand up and tell you that on camera. I was a real abduction victim. I have pages and pages of this account which I can share with you and give you details about that online if you want to look at it. We don't have time to go into all of that. But I went back and I re-examined my own experience. I was my own skeptic. I looked at it and looked at it and looked at it and tried to figure out what kind of insanity could have produced this kind of delusion. And I realized, no, you're not insane. You had a real experience. Why is it important? My wife, I love her dearly. She loves me with care. She was there times when I was in the hospital on the edge of death and being worked on by doctors. She stood by me through all that, and she will tell me now, why is it so important? Why go to the MUFON meetings? Why get involved with the paranormal investigative type stuff? Legitimate question from somebody that cares about you. I have 2 little grandchildren. I care about what people think about me. I care about what kind of questions they're going to ask later, and I got to give them a real answer. I wouldn't lie to those 2 little kids for nothing. But I want them to know the truth. But I want them to know it in a way to where it benefits them, as all of us do. So those are my concerns. My first concern is to my family, for their welfare, for their well-being. My second concern is to everyone I answer to in life. Whether they be a boss on the job, a superior, whether it be someone related to some sort of church activity, or my friends. I'm accountable to them for truth. Truth that is uncompromised by anything that I might want them to believe. What matters is what is true. When I was 5 years old and I had my experience, the first stigma came from the person that it meant. Okay? Saw him in detail, wanted to share it with the person that meant the most to me. I run in the house to get my dad. He said, "Oh son, get back outside and play." I said, "No." Now I was a kid, I was 5 years old. I didn't know the difference between this and airplanes. I said, "No, Dad, come out, really. You need to see these neat looking airplanes in the sky." And he said, "Oh son, if you don't get out there now, I'm going to take a belt to you." Back then, they used to take belts to kids. And I knew what that meant. And I knew that if I didn't mind my dad, I was taught respect at an early age. I went out on the front porch, I hung my head. Very disappointed. I didn't even look up to see if they were still there. I was so disappointed by the reaction of my dad. It affected me in ways I never knew. I began to talk to my brothers about my experiences. Well, it was all fresh on my mind. I had one little brother, and the other one was a little too small to comprehend, but I was 5, my other little brother, he was almost 4. We were close in age. And about a week after this experience, my dad told me he was going to punish me if I didn't stop talking to my little brother because it was going to give him nightmares. So what I did what my dad told me. Later, I would be out by the fence where all the kids was playing, doing stuff, looking at the sky, looking at the clouds, out of just whatever. I don't know why I did that. It was just interest. But I'd stay out there a lot. And my dad came out one day and said, "Son, if you don't get over there and play with the other kids, your grandma and them think you're retarded." Stigma. You're a 5-year-old kid. You don't want nobody to think you're retarded. Think about that. Stigma. Okay, let's move it up a little bit. You go into high school, you want to be cool. You want to be accepted. You don't want to get too far out of the norm of your peer group. You start talking about your UFO experiences, what's going to happen? Even if they're real. I don't care if somebody else's is real or not. I know what happened with me. I found out I could not talk to them, and guess what? clamped up. Didn't even bring up the subject. When I would be in the bookstores and stuff, I would look for subject material as a teenager because I had a curiosity. And you know, over the years, there's been some little different publications come out. And you and I all know, all of us know, 99% of it is just to sell books. You don't know what's real and what's not. But you have a talent built in you because of your experience to somehow separate what really does feel real to you. And over the years I gleaned, began to learn some researchers' names and really got interested. They became my heroes. People like, way back, we had people like Colonel Wendell Stevens, way back there. I don't know what all was real or not, but I know the man had a lot of info. So I got interested in looking at all these characters, George Adamski's pictures and all that old stuff, and Richard Haynes's books. I met Richard Haynes when he worked at NASA, by the way. I was in an aviation school program as a teenager, and we got a tour of NASA, and he gave the tour. And he was over the Apollo simulator facility there at Johnson Space Center in Houston. I didn't even know who this guy was. And he took us in there and showed us this big painted globe that they had painted in New York and donated to NASA that was worth like $150,000. And they had the little camera that would go in and out on the globe as the globe rotated to simulate being in orbit and them looking out their window. They showed us all that. And he made a statement. Didn't know anything about the man's books. But as we were going through, as just a high school group of seniors, he made the statement when we were looking at this little mirror deal they had set up that gave a reflection, made it look like you were out in space at an angle, where they could simulate another spacecraft for docking. And he said, they have that one too. And he said, and I'm not talking about the Russians. I caught it. I don't know how many caught it. But I remembered his name, and sure enough, he had 2 or 3 research books out on how to examine photographic images. And it was all related to UFO research. Dr. Richard Haynes, in case, does anybody remember that name, Richard Haynes? Okay, well, great. He's got some old stuff that's pretty interesting. He really does, if you can find any of his books. Remember that Dr. Richard Haynes. Went through all the Billy Meyer stuff. We gleaned from all these experiences. More recently, Bob Lazar. I've done everything to find Bob. Trust me, the first thing I did when I hit Las Vegas was go to work trying to find Bob. Bob knows how to hide. I went through 5 different Robert Lazars before I found Bob. And he had already left Vegas, and he was working in New Mexico on a corporation project trying to do the hydrogen thing for car engines, a new company, and no longer wanted to talk to anybody. Man, that's something, Bob. I went to all this trouble, now you don't want to talk to me. Come on, guy. No excuse for that. Well, the point about stigma, guys, is what we have to realize is when and where we can talk. And where we can talk open. Why? And we're fixing to open this up in a few minutes. There's other things I can cover. Stereotyping. It's dangerous. It's harmful. You remember back in the old days when we were worse in society about separating groups and stereotyping them, and we wouldn't even know what we were saying was wrong? One of the worst stereotyped groups now is us. People who have had encounter experiences are very much mistreated in the media. Very much mistreated in the articles and things that are wrote about them. We're mistreated publicly in churches of all places. Not taken serious by the general public. Why in the world would we not want to come out against it? Stigma. Because we are afraid of what's going to happen to us and those we care about. What somebody's going to say to our kids. What somebody's going to say to our grandkids. We're worried about the repercussions of having to defend something we should never have to defend. Thank God we have people like Stanton Friedman, who did some solid statistical research, comparisons, run some numbers, and can stand up there and say, well, here's why it has to be real. Look at this, look at that. I'm thankful for a certain theologian that has come out and said some things that really puts him off in the corner. But the guy is up front. His name is Dr. Chuck Missler. Anybody know about him? Check out his YouTube. Check this one out called The Bible and UFOs. He's got a bunch of stuff. Powerful. He used to be CEO of Ford Motor Company. 6 years. He was involved in several contract companies that did work for the government, made a lot of money. The guy's got an open resume. Very easy to check. Very respectable gentleman. Went to school and went into theology as a service. Doctorate. Brilliant. Man, I mean, this guy's brilliant. Check out Dr. Charles Messler. He explains to the folks that don't believe that UFOs, the subject UFOs, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not just talking about unidentified flying objects. I'm talking about the whole phenomenon. It's all in the Bible. For folks that want to say, oh, it doesn't have nothing to do with it. Yes, it does. It's all in there. So that stigma that we deal with in that public arena, if you don't want to speak up, just say, hey, check this out. Check out what that guy said about it. That's what I do. I used my fictitious character called White Shoes Eddie. When I don't want to say something that's going to put me on the spot, I'll blame it on White Shoes Eddie. I say, White Shoes Eddie says. We have to use that sometimes. Because there's some places we can talk. Some places we know better than to talk. Because I'm not going to go out in a pack of wolves and put on my fresh meat suit. And neither are you. But bear in mind, I want to say, and I'm trying to fit all this in real quick, because we want to have time to talk and discuss. I think stigma, dealing with the aftermath of abduction, dealing with the aftermath of encounter. Some encounters are very, very profound. Some sightings are very profound. Even if there's no interaction physically, you see an alien machine that you know we don't have the top technology to produce. You see that machine there. You watch that machine. You take in the detail. It's going to have an effect. It's going to affect your awareness. Because you're going to know something the other guy hadn't seen. There may be a few here and there you connect with in life, as we have done, who have an interest that you can talk with. You're going to meet a few who have seen sometimes the same thing you have, that you can make a real connection with that benefits you. In stigma, in dealing with it, there's two things. There's discussion groups, which is what we're doing tonight. And there's support groups. I need both. I'm an intelligent, qualified guy with a good education, with good grades behind me, good academics, good solid job experience. But I need a support group. I need friends that I can talk to occasionally. Because there's folks that I work with, folks I'm in contact with in this life, I cannot open up with. I can't just say anything that I need to say and not worry about stigma, the repercussions, the judgment. Any of you deal with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. I'm not alone. I was hoping I wouldn't be. Okay. Now let me say a little bit. I'm going to tell you some things I've never said publicly for fear. Common sense, wisdom, and for some of this I'll use White Shoes Eddie.